Welcome. My name is Professor Sarah Uni, and today I'm working with Dr. Richard Proctor, and we are from the Education Futures Collaboration Charity, working on the BRIST project to help you develop research questions as teachers that are interested in taking research on your own practice. Today, in this slideshow, which is going to be available to you as a resource in which you can take your time to look at and read further, we just want to very quickly, in the first video, introduce you to how to design research questions, to understand how to create good questions, understand that there can be bad questions and that they won't help, and also be aware that all questions must be ethical. So we're asking you to be aware of what's unethical. Okay, we're going to move on now to slide 2, which gives the overview of the research process so that you're clear what this is before we go on to refine developing questions. So start off in your practice as a teacher with thinking about what is this something I would like to identify to investigate. Is there a particular problem that I'm experiencing with a set of learners or with a particular aspect of my professional practice that I would like to explore? Is there something in particular I want to examine? Whatever it is, and it can be very broad to start off with identifying keywords in relation to your problem or topic. You can then have a look at what relevant literature has already been written on this research problem. For example, if you're a teacher and want to be asking better types of questions in your teaching, there is already research literature on teachers asking questions that you can look at. And we will point you to the resource called the Mesh Guides project, and we'll put the URL up for that, and you can put into the Google search engine Mesh Guides, which will also give you an overview and summaries of a lot of research that's undertaken already in the field of education. Your next job will be to identify more specifically what is the purpose of your research. What kinds of data do you need to gather? How will you interpret that data? And how will you evaluate it to make sure that you've actually created solutions to the problem that you're investigating? So that's the research process as a cycle, but key to this is developing your research questions. Okay, you've had an opportunity to look at the slides and you can also look at them again after our very short video. But what we'd like to say to you is think about creating good research questions that will guide your actual action and your processes of collecting the data. So this is an area that needs to be of interest to you. What do you want to find out about? It's no good if it is really boring to you. Please choose something that is a genuine concern for you. And then once you've decided on your research topic, we'll now move on to looking at what constitutes a good question. And in our next slide, we're going to look at the characteristics of good research questions. So first of all, we said please choose a research topic and overall arching aim and question that's of interest to you, but then make sure that your question is feasible. And what we mean by that is that you can actually do it. Okay, do you have enough time and energy to be able to look at a particular issue? In other words, you need to make it manageable. Okay, it doesn't need to be a PhD. It can be a very short, specific piece of research that you do that is time bound and that you have the energy to do that on top of your full-time post and your professional practice. So this is what we mean by feasible. You can actually answer the question. Next, make sure your question is really clear. Okay, can people understand the keywords in your question? This is important because you're going to be asking whether it's your learners or other colleagues to provide you with data. They need to know and have a very clear understanding of what it is you want to find out about. The next aspect of a really good research question is that it needs to actually be significant. And what we mean by this is to not ask trivial questions or to not ask questions that are obvious and aren't going to provide you with anything that you wouldn't know if you weren't just to have an intelligent conversation or reflection about it. So ask a real world issue that you want to find out about that is worth investigating and you think will create new important knowledge for your staff and for your students. Now, I know the slide says it might provide knowledge about the human condition. I think that's a little grandiose, and I would say don't do that. Just do something that's of interest to you, of interest to your school and your staff and your students, that is significant in your context. It's important to whom you are working with in your area, whether that's subject, pedagogy, or your school and your region. Okay, your question is significant. And then really importantly, questions must be ethical. They must not involve any physical or psychological distress to your participants, and this is where we need to be sensitive. So a very quick example is some people have been researching the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic on students' mental health and well-being and the distress that they may have experienced. Well, we need to do that sensitively, because what we don't want to do is to re-trigger any of that stress by asking about it. So do be very mindful that your research is always ethical. So to be really clear, when you've brainstormed your research questions, if you can find a colleague to discuss it with, just go through this as a checklist. Is this question feasible? Is it clear? Is it important and significant? And is it ethical? And that's our framework to help you create good questions for doing your research. So the most important thing about completing a piece of research is to make sure that you actually have the resources that enable you to complete it. So once you have your questions and you've also identified your research methods, make sure that you have the resources to be able to undertake, whether it's your interviews, your focus groups, or your questionnaires. Have you got the time to do that? And have you got the resources in terms of accessing your participants, ensuring that your participants also have the time to give you the data, and that you can do this in a way that can be achievable? Okay, this is your research and no one is going to be writing it for you, so it must be doable. And by that we mean you can start it, you can undertake each of the processes in the stages, that you will be able to end up with data that you're then able to analyze and then draw some conclusions from. So we're going to go on to the slide that is about that process coming to a full conclusion. But check, can you actually do your research and do you have the resources to do it? So whilst this slide presentation has been about identifying research questions, we want to have the context in which this process fits into your action research cycle. So we're going to end up here with that overview of making it very clear that you're able to identify your research topic. You can look at other literature and mesh guides and other forms of online resources that look at your topic and what's been done previously, that you can then refine your research and develop your questions. You can collect your data, and it might be more than one type of data you're collecting, but be clear how you can do that, that you then have sufficient time to analyze and interpret your data, that you can then evaluate it and draw some very important conclusions and any recommendations for practice that we then encourage you to share with your colleagues. Thank you.